Paula Dreesen, a volunteer preserve steward here at Arcadia Dunes, the C.S. Mott Nature Preserve. Today we're at Baldy. It's a dune. It's both a parabolic dune and a perch dune. Parabolic dunes have U-shaped bowls. This is a bowl and here's a fresher bowl over here. And it's a perch dune because this dune up here is perched over 300 feet above Lake Michigan. It's mid-June and that's the time for peak wildflower blooms up at Baldy. I'll show you some yellow, orange, blue, and other wildflowers today. There are 3 bright yellow flowers up on the dune. This one is called hairy Puccoon. It has tubular flowers with 5 flaring lobes. It's called hairy because the leaves and stems are, if you get really close, are hairy. It's kind of bristly hairy. There's another Puccoon. It's called a hoary Puccoon. That one grows more on prairie. It's kind of confusing. Hoary Puccoon is also hairy, but it has softer hairs versus the hairy Puccoon, which is bristlier hairs. It's easiest to just remember by habitat. If it's growing on a sand dune, it's a hairy Puccoon. If it's growing on a prairie, it's hoary Puccoon. This plant here is Balsam Ragwort. It's a loose cluster, an umbel of individual bright yellow flowers. Yellow flowers are composite flowers, so they have disc flowers in the middle and then ray flowers that look like petals on the outside. Another composite yellow flower out here is sand Correopsis. There's a lot of Correopsis out here. When you're walking around in the dune, you might look close to see if there's a goldenrod crab spider on the blossom. Crab spiders are kind of cool. They can either be yellow or white, and they can change from one color to the other. And if it was on a Correopsis, it would be a yellow flower, so it'll blend in. Their favorite food are wasps and bees, and they're actually hunters. They don't spin webs. They will hang out on their flower, and when a wasp or a bee comes, they'll grab it with its front legs and they'll eat it immediately. Anyways, sand Correopsis, and you might be lucky and find a little crab spider. The orange flowers you see here are wood lily. They're unlike the Michigan lily. The Michigan lily has dangling flowers. The wood lily has erect flowers. It's a bright color, so pollinators will see it at a long distance. And one thing that's really fun, if you take your camera and you take a photo right down the middle of the flower, there's spots on the inside. And what's really cool is edit your photo, crop it right in there, and you get a really cool geometric design. So that's the wood lily. And the other flower of color that we have out here is the Harebell. It's kind of a purplish blue, really delicate paper-like bell flowers that move in the wind. These guys are a little bit harder to photograph. The Harebell. This little plant here is red windflower, also called red anemone. It's in bloom in May. The flowers are red, reddish maroon, and now it has the fruiting pieces that are kind of woolly or cottony. They'll even get more fluffy as the month goes on. But red windflower. This plant here is pitcher's thistle. It is the most important plant here on the dune. The reason why it's important is it's a threatened species federally and it's a state threatened species. Some of the threats to this plant are overdevelopment, invasive species, and recreational overuse. It's only found in the Great Lakes Basin on the shores of Lake Michigan, Lake Huron, and Lake Superior. I want you to know this plant as a mature adult flowering plant and as a young plant so that you don't step on it when you're out here. One of the things you can do to tell that it's a pitcher thistle is the color. It's a whitish blue. There are whitish blue little hairs on the plant. One of the adaptations the plant has to this harsh environment, living on a sand dune. Those hairs reflect the sun rays and minimize evaporation of the plant. Another adaptation is the taproot, which is about a 6-foot long taproot. Here's a younger pitcher thistle, and here's a little tiny pitcher thistle. Don't step on the little guys because it takes them 5 to 8 years before they will grow into a blooming plant. This is a monocarpic plant, which means it only blooms on its last year. So this is the last year for this one. Hopefully it'll make a lot of seed. Seed is dispersed by wind and water. So I mentioned one of the threats to pitcher thistle is invasive species. Up here on Baldy, there are 3 invasive species that have impacted the dune the most have been baby's breath, bladder campion, and spotted knapweed. The Grand Traverse Regional Land Conservancy crews have been working at eradicating those 3 plants for probably 15 years. There's hardly any baby's breath left, so that's a good thing for this plant. Another one is recreational overuse. Think back to the days of the dune buggy where there was no vegetation on a dune, and this plant isn't going to do well there. But a little bit of hiking, a little bit of use out here is probably a good thing. In the early days of acquiring Arcadia dunes, Conservancy staff mulled over the idea of should we close off Baldy to protect this plant. There's a couple reasons not to do that. One is people walking on paths, since we get a lot of traffic, mainly sticking to the used pathways, does create a little bit of open space, and the seeds of the pitcher thistle need open sand to germinate. And the other important reason is if people are allowed to visit here, this place, they'll fall in love with it and they'll care for it. So when you're up here in Baldy, make sure you look out for this guy and don't step on the pitcher thistle. This plant here is wormwood. It doesn't look like much. It's not flowering now. The foliage is bluish green. Here's pitcher thistle, bluish green. It's a lot darker though, so it's easy to tell the difference in the color and the texture. This plant, wormwood, does flower, little teeny tiny little yellow flowers later in the summer, but it's not anything you'd really notice. The most interesting and important thing about wormwood here on the dune is it's the host plant for Orobanche, or clustered broomrape is the common name. Orobanche is a state-threatened species. It's a little tubular pipe little plant about 3 to 5 inches tall. It doesn't have chlorophyll, so it needs to attach to the roots of the wormwood to get its energy. The Orobanche the color is kind of yellowish brown, so it blends right in with the sand. They're really hard to find, but if you walk around in the dune long enough, look besides and around all the wormwood, and if you're lucky, you'll find a Orobanche. Now we're out at the Lake Michigan Bluff, and this patch of plant here is called smooth rose. Really fragrant flowers, and they're very smooth. There are a couple of tiny thorns, but for the most part it's real smooth stems. So that's smooth rose. Next to it is sand cherry. This is a sprawling shrub that's like a dune binder. As the dune sands bury part of it, it'll send branches up out of the sand and keep growing. It's past flower and it's making its fruit. So there are cherries here, and it's a wildlife useful plant. It's also useful as a sand binder to keep the dune intact. This clump here used to be 30 feet from the edge of the dune. It's kind of an example. This is an area that's prone to erosion, especially with the lake level being up high. So when you're out here at the bluff edge, we ask that you tread lightly, try to protect these plants that are trying to hold the dune together. Thanks for watching. I hope you learned some new plants that you can identify when you come out here for a hike on your own.